Hey guys, welcome back into this live session. In this live session, we will go ahead and configure very basic ISIS within the our core network. So there are a couple of things I want to mention one more time. There are two parts within our topology that we'll be working with. The part two or the side B, I have pre-configured this time with the ISIS as our IGP routing protocol. We will be configuring our left-hand side, which is our side A. All the routers in our side A are within the ISIS area, and the area that we are using is 49.0.0.0.1. As you can see here, this will be the IS area that we'll be using. Also, all of the routers are configured as a level 2 router. So within ISIS, you can configure router to be a level 1 router or to be a level 2 router. A level 1 router can talk to a level 1 router. A level 2 router can talk to a level 2 router, as well as you can configure a level 1 and a level 2 router. That means that router can talk to both level 1 as well as level 2 router. So something to keep in mind. And as usual, just like with our OSPF session, we will be configuring certain interfaces to be our passive interface. And we will go ahead and do some of the standard things like we want to definitely log the neighbor changes events and other thing. We will see who will be our designated IS. So like in the case of OSPF, we have a concept of a DR and BDR. In IS, we don't have a BDR kind of a concept. It's only the designated router. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So let me go ahead and quickly bring up our router R1. So, okay, you guys can see the router R1. This is the router R1 that we will be configuring with. And as I said, in this lab, we are working with the ISIS. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. But before we go ahead and get started, I just want to tell you one thing. See, when we were configuring the passive interface in case of OSPF, so you go ahead and start an OSPF routing process, and then you go ahead and do certain configuration, and we were able to just directly specify the passive interface. If you try to use the same approach with the ISIS, instead of talking, maybe I'll show you, and then when we see the issue, we'll see how do we really solve that problem. So I think that sounds pretty interesting. So again, if you take a look, I am using pretty much the same lab topology with the similar set of IP and other things. So let's go ahead and get started pretty much. Let me just make it a little big, this window. Now let's go to the conf. Now we'll go ahead and say router ISIS. So when we configure ISIS with the OSPF, we had the process ID. With the IS, we configure something called as a routing area tag or simply the area tag. So in this case, the area tag that we plan to use is again 100. So let me go ahead and say 100. And as I mentioned earlier, the ISIS area ID that we plan to use is the 49.0.0.0.1. And for the identification purpose, we will be using their loopback, respective loopbacks. So with that, let's go ahead and configure the net. So with the net, we can go ahead and configure our network entity title, which is our net. That's what you see here, the net. So that will be 49.0.0.0.1. So this is only the area pretty much. Now we'll go ahead and make use of the loopback. So you will see I will be writing that loopback as the identification. So that will be like 10.131.30.1.1.00. So if you take a look at this is 10, 131, 131, 31, 31, 1, 1. So that's how we can go ahead and make the loopback as a kind of a net or the network entity title to identify this particular router with our ISIS topology. So with that, let's go ahead and press enter. Now we'll go ahead and configure our IS type. As I said, there are a couple IS type that you can configure: level 1, level 1, 2, and level 2 only. In this case, we are only working with the level 2. So I'll go ahead and say level 2 only. Now we will be using the as metric style as wide. And the metric style wide, when we work with some of the later hands-on labs like an MPLS and other things, it's good to make use the wide as the metric style, and it has a better support for some of the things. So that's what we kind of using the metric style being wide. And again, we'll go ahead and log off all our changes. Now, once that is done, now at this stage, if we try to configure a passive, let's see what happens. So we are sitting on router R1, so we'll do a passive interface. And in this case, we'll say, okay, hey, the passive interface, let's say we want to do our as usual, the interface which is connected to router 8. So we'll say Ethernet, and that is 0/1, and see what happens. It kind of really cranks up saying, okay, hey, invalid command if CLNS only. So what that really indicates that so far on this router, we have not configured or we have not enabled ISIS on any other interface. So before you can do a passive on any interface, you need to have ISIS enabled on one or more of the interfaces. Only then you can go ahead and do a passive on any other interface. So with that, let's come out from our ISIS config, and now let's go to one of the interfaces. So in this case, we will be enabling the ISIS onto the interface E02, which is facing our R2, as well as E03, which is facing our port 2 our R2 basically. And let me quickly show you one more time. E03 is facing the port 2 router 2. So on these two interfaces, we will be running the ISIS. So let me go ahead and enable the ISIS routing protocol on these two interfaces. And once that is done, then we'll go ahead and configure our passive interface on a couple of interface where we don't want any routing updates. So with that, let's come to the interface. And first interface that we want to enable is 02, which is facing our port 2 router 2. And now we'll say IP router. With the IP router, we'll go ahead and say, okay, hey, it clearly says ISIS routing for IP. And with that, we are being asked to specify the process tag. So the process tag in this case is 100. Now let's go ahead and enable the same thing on this 03. So let's quickly repeat 0/3, and the process is pretty much same. So we just went and enabled the ISIS routing on these two interfaces. As you can see, it clearly says, okay, hey, we are seeing a neighborship coming up with this particular router, which is sitting on Ethernet 03, which is our part 2 router 2. So in this interface, router R1 went ahead and formed an ISIS neighborship. So now we definitely know on this router we have ISIS running on certain interfaces. Now at this stage, if we go back to the ISIS and if we try the passive interface command, we should not see any error showing up. And that's the case. So something to keep in mind when you're working with ISIS versus OSPF. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for our serial interfaces, 10 and 11. Now once that is done, so we just simply went ahead and I forgot that we had to do this for our loopback also. So passive interface, loopback, 0. Now at this stage, we just went ahead and configured a couple of the things. So before I show you something, let's go ahead to our router R2, and we will go ahead and configure our R2 for the similar ISI. So on this router R2, we have quite a few number of interfaces that we need to configure. So let me just go ahead and bring up our router R2. Let's come back to the conft. Now, just to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and paste some of the configuration. And as you can see, we just started the ISIS routing tag process 100. We went ahead and specified the our network. IS type is again level 2. Metric style is wide. We are logging all neighborship thing. And the reason we came out again, before we do a passive interface on our loopback, we need to enable the ISIS on a couple of our interfaces. So on this router, there are quite a few number of interfaces. If I quickly walk you through Ethernet 01, which is connected to our router R6, we have 02, which is connected to our router R1. We have the 03, which is connected to port 2's router R1. We also have this 10, which is connected to port 2's router 2 basically. We have Ethernet 11, which is connected to our pod's router R3, as well as will be using the serial 20, which is connected to port 2's router R3. So on all of these interfaces, we'll go ahead and start or enable the ISIS routing process. So with that, let's go to the first interface. We'll say interface Ethernet 0/1. We'll say IP router ISIS 100. The next interface is 02. Just simply enable router ISIS 100. 03. On this interface is also we say 100. Now for 1/0, we'll say IP router 1. And for the 1100, and then last but not the least is our serial interface, serial 1 slash, sorry, serial 2/0. 2/0, and let's go ahead and do that. And you see, when we were doing enabling this, we observe some of the ISIS neighborship coming up, and it says, okay, hey, we have a neighborship coming up with this router, which is our pod 1 router's net ID. If you recall, that's what we had configured, 31.2.1. We also came up with a neighborship in pod 2 with the router R1. Another neighborship came on, and that's what it shows. Okay, now we have a new urgency is kind of really up. Now we just went ahead and did this configure on the router R2. Now we need to go ahead and do the passive interface on our router loopback 0. So we'll just say simply passive interface loopback is 0. Once that is done, now R2 config is done. Now we'll go ahead and similarly configure R3, R4, R5, and R6. So now let me go ahead and bring up our router R3, and we will go ahead and start configuring the router R3. So let me quickly, to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and again paste some of this config, and let me go ahead and enable the routing. So we are on 3. On 3 has 3 interfaces, 0, 1, 0, 2, and serial 1, 0. So now let's go ahead and enable interface Ethernet 0/1 IP router ISIS 100. 0, 1 is done. Now time for 0, 2 IP router ISIS and the serial 1, 0. So we'll say serial 1/0 and IP router ISIS. Now that's done. Now let's go back to router ISIS 100, and we'll do the passive interface on our loopback 0. R3 is done. Now let's go do the similar config on our router R4. Let me log into my router quickly, and we'll share with you guys. So now let's come back and start configuring the router R4 for the similar thing. Router 4 has only one interface, which is E01. So that's good. Now let's go ahead and it's done. Interface Ethernet 0/1 IP router ISIS 100. Now let's go back to IP router ISIS 100. We'll say simply passive interface is our loopback 0. R4 config is done. Now let's minimize that. Let's come back and configure our router R5 quickly. So on R5, there is also one interface E01. So let's go ahead and start configuring the ISIS process on this router. And let's go ahead and enable the ISIS on interface Ethernet 0/1 IP router ISIS 100. That is done. Now I router ISIS 100, passive interface, loopback 0. R5 is done. Now let's go ahead and configure our last router, which is router 6. So let's come back to the, again, 6 also has only one interface, E01. So let's go ahead and quickly configure router 6. That is done. Now let's enable the IS routing process on the 0/1 IP router ISIS 100. Now let's go to the IP router ISIS 100. We'll say simply passive interface loopback 0. And at this stage, we just went ahead and enabled the or started the IS routing process on all of the routers within this our pod A. And as I mentioned, the pod B was already configured. So if at this stage, if everything is okay, we should be able to ping any router from anywhere, and we should see some of the things. So let's go ahead and quickly jump back to any of the routers. So let's log into our router R2. So at this stage, we can go ahead and see with the show, there are a few commands that we can go ahead and make use. So if you take a look at the command that will be, so we'll say, okay, hey, we'll use the CLNS network information command pretty much. So with that, we can say show CLNS. And now there are a few things that we can go ahead and verify. Definitely, we are interested in the neighbors first. So you can take a look. It says, okay, hey, we are neighbor with the router 6. We are neighbor with the router R3. We are neighbor with the router R1 within our pod. Within the pod 2, we are neighbor with 3, 2, 1. So, and that's what we can see the interfaces, their SNPA IDs, how long they are up, their type, it clearly says they are all L2. The protocol being used here is IS. So we can go ahead and verify a few things, and now we should be able to ping also. So now let's go ahead and try 131. 31 right now, we are on 2, see if we can reach 5 or not. So at this stage, we are able to reach 5. Now let's try something within our part 2. So see in the part 2, are we able to reach the router 3 or not? And you can see we can reach the router 3 within the other pod also. We can also verify few other things. So at this stage, if you take a look at show, we can use some of the ISIS command also. So take a look at the show ISIS database. It really shows, okay, hey, this is our ISIS database, the LSP hold down time, and some of their LSP IDs. And you can see the P1R1, P1R1, P1R2, R3, and some of the other information that we can go ahead and take a look here. And there are a few more commands that we can go ahead and run with. If we want to get a detail about a specific one, let's say we are interested in getting detail about our this guy particular, so we can say show ISIS with the database. Now within that, we can go ahead and specify one of our fellow, and then we can say here, okay, what are we interested into? We can go ahead and simply say the detail. Now we are taking a look at the detail of one of the router. Now in this case here it says, okay, the host name is P1R1. That's the IP address, and it shows some of the IS extended attributes and some of the other information that we can go ahead and take a look at here. And that's what it shows, the metric and other information for this particular your ISIS node. There is one more thing I want you to take a look here. If I do show ISIS, we can also say the neighbors. Maybe I didn't mention that during the OSPF, when you do show ISIS neighbor, in the neighbor, the system ID is the host name. But in the case of OSPF, that's kind of their our IDs basically. So it's much easier to identify who you are neighbor with instead of looking at the IP address and some of the other information. So that's pretty handy that way. Now, like as we mentioned earlier, in the OSPF, we had this concept of DR and BDR, and we tried influencing that decision using the priority stuff and all. So right now we can also take a look at and see who is our DIS in this particular topology. So for that, we can go ahead and make use of our show CLNS command. And then let's say the interface. Right now we are on the router R2. So we'll say interface Ethernet, one which is connected to R3. So I'm doing show CLNS interface Ethernet 1. So if you take a look here, it says one of the command, a couple of outputs. The one of the output that we are interested into, it says that DRID. So it says, okay, hey, in your case, your DIS or the DR within this IS domain or topology is your router R3. Now your router R3 is the DIS. Now if you go to some other router, let's go to maybe router 5 in this case, and possibly let's repeat this command. So we can say show CLN. So CLNS interface Ethernet 0/1. And that's what it says. Okay, hey, from within this guy, this side, okay, the R5 is the one which is the DR. So now let's go within this particular out of this 3, 4, and 5. Let's go to the router R3 and take a look at the similar output. So if you do the show CLNS interface, CLNS interface Ethernet, and we are on R3, so the interface which is connected to 4 and 5 is 02. So let's take a look at 02. It says, okay, hey, now the DR for these guys we are saying is the R5. And let's say within these guys, you want to make sure that the designated IS or DR or DIS is the right terminology. You want to make R3 as your DIS. How do we do that? So if you recall, within the OSPF, we also had the priority. We can go ahead and do the similar things for the OSPF, or sorry, for the ISIS also. So now we know the interface which is connected to 4 and 5 is 02. We can go ahead and increase the priority for that particular interface, forcing 3 to take the role of a DIS. So let's go ahead and do that. So right now we can see on R3 clearly the 5 is being designated as the DIS. Now we are going to influence that decision. So we will go to interface Ethernet 02, which is facing our router 4 and 5. And now we'll go ahead and say, okay, hey, ISIS. With the ISIS, there are a few things, and one of the things it clearly says priority, set priority for designated router election. So we are, kind of trying to influence the DIS election by using the priority. So now we'll say ISIS priority. We can go ahead and specify priority. If you see, the priority values are here from 0 to 127. But in the case of OSPF, it was 0 to 255. So it's only half here. Something to keep in mind again when you're working with ISS. Now let's go ahead and increase the priority to maybe 100. Now let's go ahead and run the command that we ran earlier. So now if I do show CLNS interface Ethernet 02, and you can see right now our DR or the DIS has been changed from 5 to 3. And if I scroll up quickly, before we went ahead and configured that, the DIS within this one was R5. Now that has been changed to the R3. If you quickly come back to the same thing, within this, it says, okay, hey, for this side is R3 anyway. So that's how we can go ahead and influence the decision or the selection of our DIS. So hopefully you guys got some basic idea in terms of how do you configure or run an ISIS within a core. When you are working with the ISIS, there are a few things that you need to pay attention is make sure your net that you are specifying is unique on all the routers. Make sure you have the same type of IS level configured on all of your devices. And if you want to have the passive interface, before you do configure a passive interface, make sure you have enabled ISIS on one or more interfaces. If that's not the case, it will go ahead and prompt you an error. So that kind of indicates, hey, we have not enabled IS on any other interfaces before we can do go ahead and suppress that. So that'll be all for this particular broadcast. I will see you guys sometime later. Thank you.